So we just heard Jesus say, I came into the world that those who do not see might see. And then in our first reading, not as man sees does God see, because man sees the appearance, but the Lord looks into the heart. So the readings we just heard challenge us to see things as God sees them, and to open our eyes to the light of Christ. We heard in our first reading how the Lord chose a young shepherd boy from Bethlehem. His 7 older brothers were presented, and Samuel was sure that the Lord had selected one of them. But no, the Lord selected the forgotten one, the little shepherd boy. His name was David. And in our gospel reading, we heard the wonderful story of the man who was born blind, given the light of sight by Jesus. Imagine the wonder of that man who had never seen anything, who is now able to see. Surely that would have been a cause for great rejoicing. But the Pharisees weren't rejoicing at all. Instead, they had made their position clear that if anyone acknowledged Jesus as the Christ, they would be expelled from the synagogue. So because of that warning, even the parents of the man that was born blind would not even testify for their own son. Instead, we heard them say, "Oh, our son is old enough. Go and ask him." So the Pharisees questioned the young man. And then after they listened to him, they called him a sinner and a liar, and they expelled him from the synagogue. And that's where he's reacquainted with Jesus. Jesus was also rejected by the synagogue and by the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were upset with Jesus because this healing took place on the Sabbath. They said, "You can't do any work on the Sabbath." But did that include works of mercy and healing? So when Jesus searches out the young man, he asks of who he was healed by and reveals himself as the Son of God, the Messiah. And the young man says, "I believe, Lord," and we heard that he worshiped him. It's very easy for us to condemn the Pharisees. They always seem to be in a role that we would say, "I would never do that." But we need to ask ourselves, are there times that we act like they did, with hardened hearts? Or are there times that we're locked into seeing things our way and that we're blinded to the truth? I'd like to share a story about a time when my eyes were opened. And it's as simple as a blank sheet of paper. It's white, it's clean, it can be helpful and useful. In fact, if you needed a piece of paper, you might ask me for it and you'd say, "Thank you for the piece of paper." But things change if I crumple it up and toss it on the ground. Now we call it trash. And if I threw that wad of paper out of my window as I was driving around, I could get a serious fine. And if you saw someone toss it on the ground, you might have a name for them, a litter bug, or maybe something more serious. Or you might curse them for destroying our environment. Now, I actually love nature, and I believe that trash has its own place, so I get frustrated when it's not in the right place. And that was the mindset that I had when I went to Honduras on my first mission trip. Honduras is a very poor country in Central America, and there is trash everywhere. And I was appalled at it. Even when the people unwrap something that you gave to them, they'd unwrap it and just toss the wrapper aside. And I thought to myself, I'm so fortunate to live in a place where that wouldn't be allowed and to be frowned upon. The people of Honduras have a lot to learn. So our spiritual director and the man who we went to visit and help in Honduras, his name is Father Emil Cook, and I talked to him about this problem that I saw, and his response opened my eyes. He said to me, "Mark, you know, we Hondurans we aren't overly concerned about trash that goes on the ground. Paper and things like that will decompose pretty quickly, and any plastic or glass is collected by the poorest of the poor, and they sell it to help feed their families. What we're most concerned about is keeping our minds and our hearts clean. So you'll notice if you visit families that they might have a crucifix or an image of Jesus in their homes, and that the music you'll hear or the images that you'll see on billboards or on television are clean and wholesome. He said, take note when you go back to the United States. Take note of the difference. You might see less garbage along the roads and in your cities, but how much trash do you see and hear on billboards or in music or in images that come into your homes on either television or computer screens? And then think, which of our two countries is better for the soul? That answer opened my eyes. We're so quick to see a stray fast food bag along the road and maybe curse the person that threw it there, but we can be blind to see some of the other rubbish that surrounds us, that comes into our lives and into our homes. So we need to ask ourselves, what does Jesus see when he looks around our homes and around our cities? This past week, we had our parish mission, and it was another opportunity to have our eyes opened. And not all of you were able to attend, so I wanted to just share a brief tidbit from each of the 3 nights. On Monday, Sheila DeLuca told a story about a poor woman who went to the river each day with 2 clay pots on her shoulders to collect water for her family. One of them was fine and one of them was cracked. So after she filled her pots and came back to her village, she had all of the water in this pot and only about half in this one. And some of her friends said, why don't you get rid of that cracked pot? Because you're wasting water coming back. And she said, no. She said, if you notice along that side of the path, flowers are blooming. And every couple of weeks I pick the flowers and I sell them in the market, and I'm able to feed my family. And the moral of that story was that God uses cracked pots to help build the kingdom. And then on Tuesday, Tony Pickler was here, and he told us that we are a church of Jesus and we, not Jesus and me. And as this church of Jesus and we need to reach out to our brothers and sisters and help them along on our journeys. And then he shared a powerful quote from one of his favorite authors, Father Henry Nouwen. And it goes like this: we have been called to be fruitful, not successful, not productive, not accomplished. Success comes from strength, stress, and human effort. Fruitfulness comes from being vulnerable and the admission of our own weakness. And then on Wednesday, Father Dan Felton challenged us to see ourselves as saints. He said, we are wired by God to be saints, to be holy, to be with him. He also told us that both saints and sinners fall down, but it's the saints who get up and keep going. So during this holy season of Lent, may God open our eyes to see things the way that God sees them. Open my eyes, Lord. Help me to see your face. Open my eyes, Lord. Help me to see. And now I'll pick up my trash.